Right, so as you know already, there are approximately 14 to 15 CR questions on average out of 41 questions in the verbal. The section is not divided, meaning the questions appear at random. Test takers are about 1 minute 30 seconds per question. Now, these are the different types of critical reasoning questions. So you've got strengthen the argument, weaken the argument, what can we infer, find the assumption, explain the discrepancy or the paradox, and copy the logic or explain the structure. There's also evaluate the conclusion, which is not listed there, but that's one question type as well, evaluate the conclusion. So every critical reasoning question is divided into the stimulus, which is what you see first, the reading, then the question stem, and then the 5 answer choices. Now, most sources recommend that you read the stimulus first. And to be honest, I find that is usually the best thing to do. Some people like to read the question first and then read the stimulus, but I think that can get confusing if you do that. But you find your own way of whatever comes natural to you, whatever you find most effective. Everybody's different. So I've got down here the 6 steps to success for this is identifying the premises, the conclusions and the assumptions, reading the stem, getting an idea of the right answer, so you get the idea of an answer before you come to the answer choices. Then you move to the answer choices, you eliminate the obviously bad answers, and then double check with your remaining answers. So it's a pretty straightforward, and that's probably more or less what you've all been doing already. It seems you're all quite strong with this part of the test. So here I've got a selection of words which can help us. I think it was Dima earlier who identified the hence, wasn't it, in one of the question stems. And the hence indicated a conclusion there. And we have a whole list of various words and vocabulary here which can help us to identify whether we're dealing with premises or conclusions. And you're probably already familiar with this type of language. So because, since, as, on the basis of, it follows from, in view of, we may infer, all indicate premises. Conclusions accordingly, clearly, consequently, indicates, hence, follows that, so, therefore, and so on. So reading the stem will tell you what kind of question you're getting. Is it a main idea? Is it a find the assumption? Or is it strengthen or weaken? There are many distinct stem types like accept questions, and you know already what that means. So example, all of the following are reasons to go to business school except except what? Eager to learn accounting, increase your income, impress your friends, hone your poetry skills. That should be pretty obvious which one is the except there. It's like finding the odd one out. Hone your poetry skills. So get an idea of the right answer. So persuasiveness within the context of the stem. The more unstated assumptions, the weaker the argument. The more glaring logical flaws, the weaker the argument. Now, if you see words like some, usually, sometimes, probably, most, and often, these are words which usually strengthen the argument because they qualify any claims that are being made. If you, on the other hand, see words like all or every, in all cases, things like this, there you know it's probably these are things that weaken the argument because the claims that are being made are too strong. Okay, so you're going to be looking for scope. So in this context, it just means whether the answer choice is too general or too specific.
So you mean rather it's relevant or not?
Yeah. So always, I mean, GMAT will give you answer choices where, it could be true, but it's too general. So it applies to, like I think in the one we had there with carbon dioxide and pollution, the answer choice mentioned carbon dioxide, I think, if I remember correctly, but Sue had only mentioned pollution or something like that. So in that example then, the answer choice was too specific, the scope was too limiting. All right, so usually answer choices, you'll have one that's too specific, one that's too general. So move to the answer choices, eliminate wrong answers. Typical format is like this. If you misread the passage, this could look right. B may be right. It's very close with some very subtle, small differences that most students will miss. C is the correct answer, D is the opposite, and E is something completely off topic. And that's the typical format there of the answer choices, which you may already recognize. And then normally you'll narrow them down to B and C, and you're not sure which one it is because they're both quite close. But one is obviously the closest, and that's the one you've got to go with. If you, have time, you should double check. Often there isn't enough time. But if you get the time, then you should double check. Reread the argument exactly in the stem and the answer choices. Sometimes critical reasoning answers are a matter of carefully pairing answer choices. Usually your gut choice, your instinct choice, can be correct. But if you have a specific reason, such as misreading the question, consider changing it. And be aware that GRE and GMAT are clever enough to make choices that appeal to your instincts. Yeah. So typical errors that you'll catch on double check is misreading the question stem, failing to adequately read all the answer choices, or falling for a trick answer choice. Okay, so let's have a look at a few examples here. I don't think we've had this one. So in order to save money in this fiscal year, the management voted to cut the overtime hours and hence freeze overtime wages. So the short-sighted example is yet another example of the management being penny-wise and pound-foolish. The production of what will result from this action will cause many quality defects, resulting in market complaint, and this will ultimately result in loss of market share and revenues. Okay, can somebody identify the premise or the premises of that argument?
Well, the premise is if we cut overtime hours and hence freeze overtime wages.
Right, okay. We all save money in this fiscal year. The management cut overtime hours and freeze overtime wages. And what do they think would be the conclusion of doing that?
The conclusion is that we will get some problems and lose market share.
Yeah, okay, that's right. So in order for that to be correct, in order for that conclusion to follow logically from the premise, what assumptions have to be made? And there you go.
I think that we should make an assumption that somehow revenue strongly depends on overtime wages.
Yeah, revenue and market share depends on overtime wages, or?
Yes, that's what I.
Yeah, sort of. What does the wages do for the employees?
It increases costs.
It increases costs, but what does it do for the workers?
Makes them work more.
Yeah, so the assumption will be that they should generally work more if you pay them more wages. Okay, but here I think it's assuming C, that if they do not work overtime and receive overtime pay, that the workers will become lax and means lazy in producing quality products. So it would be C in this case. The short-sighted example is yet another example of the management being penny-wise and pound-foolish. The production that will result from this action will cause many quality defects. So if you freeze overtime wages, the assumption is that workers will become lazy and will not pay attention to the quality of what they are producing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that will be C. But that's obviously an assumption. It's not, it's not necessarily the case. E would be the opposite of what we want.
Yeah.
I mean, so the assumption in our case is because they're producing bad, he believes that they will produce bad quality goods. The assumption is that by cutting the salary, that the workers will become less interested in producing quality goods. They'll become lazy. So C is the right answer. But I mean, does everybody see why C is the right answer?
Yeah. Because if we start producing bad quality products, we can assume that we will lose revenue.
Yeah, that's right. Then you would lose revenue, but it's not a necessary assumption. I mean, this is an assumption for his argument, but it's not necessarily the case. So just to analyze it in a bit more detail, so the independent fact here is that the city will freeze salaries. And the dependent fact is the assertion that lax, which means lazy, inspections lead to structural defects. And what is the relation between these two parts of the sentence? So a causal relation is being argued for. Is the assertion of a causal relation justified? Or is it based on an implicit assumption? And of course, it's based on an implicit assumption. There's no necessary causal relationship between the freezing of salaries and lax, lazy inspections. Okay? It's just assumed that will happen. So you've got here, apartment building owners argue that rent control should be abolished. Although they acknowledge that they would increase rents in the short term, owners argue that in the long term the rent increases would lead to greater profitability. Higher profits would lead to increased apartment construction, and increased apartment construction would then lead to a greater supply of residences and lower prices, as the potential apartment residents have a better selection. Therefore, abolishing rent control would ultimately reduce prices. So the question here is to try to identify the answer options which are out of scope. Right, so they don't really fit. Either they're too general, they're too specific, or they're just not relevant. So what does it say? Name an assumption means find a direct assumption of the supply-demand argument. So what's the main argument here being put forward? So apartment building owners argue that rent control should be abolished.
Yeah. So the argument is if we start to control, this will lead to reducing the price.
Yep. So they acknowledge that they would increase rents in the short term. Owners argue that in the long term, rent increases would lead to greater profitability because higher profits would lead to increased apartment construction, and increased apartment construction would then lead to greater supply and lower prices as the potential apartment residents have better selection. Do you think that's a sound argument? Is it is it necessarily the case there that would happen? What could be a problem with that? What's a problem with this argument?
And you mean what argument? That if
abolishing rent control, yeah, will lead to a reduction in prices? I mean, because that's what's being asserted here. What they're saying is we abolish rent control, so I, as a landlord, can charge whatever I want, and I'm telling you that in the future this will lead to a long-term reduction in the price of rent. Okay.
It should influence prices indirectly through several steps.
Yeah. Okay, but is it necessarily the case that if we remove or abolish rent controls, that this will lead to a reduction in prices?
In the long term, yes.
You think it's necessary?
You mean... okay.
Is there a causal relationship here? Does it necessarily happen? Because that's what they're claiming. They're claiming if A, then B. If you abolish rent controls, then you will get a reduction in prices.
They say if we stop controlling, it will lead to a price increase or decrease.
Decrease, yeah, that's what they're claiming. And it's if A, then B. So if we abolish rent controls, this will reduce the prices. Is that a sound argument? What are they assuming? Well, think about it. It says higher profits would lead to increased apartment construction. Why?
It will attract new potential market participants, which will want to get higher profits as its previous ones.
So if I'm getting more profit from abolishing rent control, does that mean I have to use that profit to build more apartments?
Not particularly you, but maybe some other potential players.
Yeah, maybe they would. But what we're talking about here is it necessarily the case? You know, because a causal relationship is being asserted here. And it can't just be, okay, maybe some would, some wouldn't, we don't know. What is being claimed is something much stronger. It's if A, then always B.
I'm sorry, Philip. What is like the task for this passage? Because I can't get it.
Well, okay. Firstly, I'm just trying to get our understanding of the argument. First of all,
okay,
right? So
you mean that in not all the cases when control should be is abolished, it's not the only case that it will lead to decreasing prices.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the case, is what I'm trying to say. But the argument as presented here assumes that it is always the case. They say that if you abolish rent control, this will lead to a reduction of prices. But
we should find some argument that will weaken this.
Well, so I was just trying to check our understanding of the argument first, yeah? And the problem with the argument then is that if we have higher profits, we might not use the profits to build more apartments. We might just use it to save the money. And in that case, it would not lead to increased apartment construction, and that would not lead to a reduction in
greater supply.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, good. So let's just go through some of these answer options then. A is current residents of rent-controlled apartments would be able to find new apartments once their rents increased. Do you think that's a relevant answer choice?
Philip, can you explain me, please? When you say answer choice, answer to what? I just can't get it.
The answer choices are A, B, C, D, E.
Answer for what question?
Well, the question stem is the critical reasoning prompt here. Apartment building owners argue that rent control. See, I think maybe what's confusing you is there's no question here. But here you've got a selection of answer choices with the A, B, C, D. And some of them sort of connect with the arguments and some of them don't. They're irrelevant. Out of scope.
And we have a question, which answer are outside the scope?
Yeah.
It's not a question for this.
Yeah,
Options.
so which are out of scope. And so if we move on, so current residents of rent-controlled apartments will be able to find new apartments once their rent increased. Is this out of scope? Well, as it says, there's nothing about that in the answer choice. So you know, in the stem. This is the stem here. There is nothing mentioned about that in the stem. So that would be an irrelevant option. It's out of scope.
Yeah, it's irrelevant.
Yeah. Okay. So this sentence expresses a nice sentiment about the welfare of renters, but it has nothing to do with our argument, which is about supply and demand. So it's out of scope. Right, so the next one, B, the fundamental responsibility of any society is to house its citizens. Is that relevant?
No.
No, it's not relevant. There's nothing about that in the stem.
Yeah, nothing about responsibility of the society.
Yeah, the argument is nothing connected with that at all. It's a supply-demand argument. So that would also be out of scope. Again, a nice sentiment, but this does not directly tie into the argument. This is a sentimental favorite, trick answer choice. So, hang on, we've got C or D? Let's have a look here. C, only current apartment owners would profit significantly from market deregulation.
It's unproven statement for me.
Yeah, that's right.
But it might be relevant.
Maybe. It's a little bit like the carbon dioxide pollution one, this. It's too specific. It talks about just current apartment owners and not apartment owners in general.
Mm-hmm.
So it's too restrictive, this one.
And it is said that only current apartments.
Yes,
and
exactly, yeah.
I don't know only or not.
That's right. Yeah, so we'd say it's too restrictive. The problem is that profits made by only current owners is not the issue at hand. It is the prices of apartments. Why wouldn't future owners profit? Again, as previously mentioned, answer choices that use words such as only tend to be outside the scope of the question. Here, only is too restrictive. Okay, so next one is D. New apartment construction will generate a greater number of jobs. Is there anything about jobs in the stem?
No.
No.
Not really. It's not an argument about jobs, is it? So D is also out of scope for that reason. So then we're left with E. The increase in the number of apartments available would exceed the number of new potential apartment residents. Do you think that's out of scope or in scope?
It's in scope.
Yeah, why?
But, it's in scope, but still it's unproven statement.
Yeah, it's an unproven statement, that's right, but at least it's relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for here. So it's relevant because it's dealing with the topic of supply and demand, which is essentially the argument that's being made in the stem. Okay, so does everybody see that, why that one's relevant? So E, the increase in the number of apartments available would exceed the number of new potential apartment residents. This is an argument about supply and demand. and we are looking for an answer about supply and demand. This is clearly within the scope of the argument, and it is in fact the correct answer. If demand rose with new apartment construction, then prices would not decline, invalidating the argument. Yeah, so there was no actual, normally when you have questions like this, there is a question. And maybe that's what confused you a little bit, that the question was missing here, and it was more about identifying the argument and then seeing which answer options were relevant and which ones weren't.
Actually, for me, just only word answer leads to confusion. If it was say like which sentence are out of scope,
right,
it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, I should have said sentences then. Yeah, officially they're called answer options, but yeah, I can call them sentences. So we've got a list of common trick questions. The first common trick question is the sentimental type of answer. So GMAT-GRE will have answer choices that sound like they should be right. So you feel it should be right there, but it's not. So for example, the level of diabetes in the United States among those over 50 has been attributed to high levels of sugar usage. In Zaire, however, diabetes rates among those over 50 are nearly as high, and sugar consumptions are much lower consumption levels. What is the most reasonable conclusion from the above passage? Now, if you see answer option A, it says if most people use sugar replacement sweeteners instead of sugar, the rate of diabetes worldwide would drop rapidly. That sounds like a good answer, and you want it to be correct because you want people not to be suffering from diabetes and you want diabetes rates to drop. So it's appealing to your sort of sentiments here, but it's wrong. Okay, so don't choose the idea of this then is don't choose answers based on sentimental appeal. Just think in terms of the logic of the argument. Okay, so B is the correct answer because it targets the flawed causal argument that sugar usage may not be the sole factor behind diabetes rates. So it's just being aware of that. So in questions about weakening or strengthening the argument, examine the argument for any unstated assumptions. So let's have a look at this. In a recent speech, the president of a major college said it is extremely valuable for college-educated adults entering the workplace to be able to speak at least one foreign language fluently. I'm therefore proposing that all of our students be encouraged to spend their junior year abroad. Can anyone identify any flaw in the reasoning there? What's the problem with the argument there? So identify the premise and the conclusion if it helps.
I find in the first sentence that it is said about the colleague-educated adults.
Yep.
And in the second, it is talking about their junior year abroad, and maybe the problem with that.
Okay.
I have another opinion. I think the main problem here is that if you spend 1 year abroad, doesn't matter which one, junior or senior, it doesn't guarantee that you speak a foreign language.
Yep, that's true. It will not guarantee that you speak a foreign language. Absolutely. So spending a year abroad will not guarantee that you learn a language fluently, because that's what is in the premise. They want them to speak at least one language fluently. So therefore, does it mean that if you go abroad for a year, that you will speak another language fluently? Maybe, but not necessarily. And conversely, could it not be the case that you could stay in the United States or stay in your own country and still learn a foreign language without going abroad?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do. So you don't need to go abroad to learn a language. Okay. So which of the following, if true, most weakens the president's argument?
D.
Yeah, D. So some students learn to speak foreign languages fluently by taking intensive immersion courses in the US. So this tells us that you don't need to go abroad. That's an unnecessary sort of addition to that argument. Right. So I look at another. Studies have shown that men aged 18 to 27 who have owned a pet for at least 2 years before marrying are 35% less likely to divorce. Researchers conclude that caring for a pet prepares men for long-term healthy relationships in marriage. Is that a good argument?
It's not necessarily.
No, it's not necessarily the case. Why not?
Because there is no argument about men aged 18 to 27 that have no pet, that haven't pet.
Yeah, that's right. Any other ideas? I mean, it's also the researchers. Yeah.
And 35% is it's too small a percent, because if they have 80 or something like this figure, it will be more strong.
Yeah, it would be a lot stronger.
Yeah.
So you could say it's not statistically significant or something.
And what was the first problem, Dima, you identified?
I said about that it is not necessary because there is no information about men that have no pet.
Okay.
And also,
well, actually, it is said that 35% less. So it's like less in comparison to men who didn't have a pet.
Okay. Studies have shown that men aged 18 to 27 have owned a pet at least 2 years before marrying. Are 35% less likely to divorce. Yeah, the assumption there would be that less likely than those who do not have a pet. But we've got here that prepares men for long-term healthy relationships. I think those are unjustified.
Yeah, that's the problem. You can still be married and have unhealthy relationships.
Yes, that's right. And it might not be a long marriage either. It could be a short marriage. But healthy, it doesn't need to be healthy. Right, let's have a look here. Which of the following, if true, most strengthens the conclusion that men who have owned pets are prepared for healthy marriages? So what would support it?
It's not B, in my opinion. Because...
Yeah, why?
Because in the first, it is only the case about the pet. And this is such as... And it's not necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. So the question we've got is just about pets. So B, should be eliminated. What about A? Would that support?
Level of stress, it's like out of scope.
It's out of scope. It is, yeah. Absolutely. C?
I would say it's also... no. Actually, it is said 25 years. It may be, you may think that it's a long-term marriage, but it's unproven.
It's not about our category 25-27. It is said that men who have 18-27.
18 to 27. That's the age range.
Yes, and in the C argument we don't have age range.
That's right, but this is just the length of marriage, 25 years. I think for me it's too specific. It's not mentioned here exactly. It's just the age range here is 18 to 27. It doesn't talk about how long somebody will be married for.
It may be connected to long-term marriage, but we can't say if it's long enough or it's
you can't say. Enough. Yeah, exactly. You can't say for sure. So what about D?
I'm sorry, can you go back for the stem?
Yep.
Okay, so D, I think D is at least in scope.
Yes, it is in scope.
And
I agree.
And it does strengthen the argument.
Yeah, it does. Because it's the exact opposite, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you have not owned a pet and you're more likely to divorce, that seems to strengthen the idea that pets do protect you against divorce. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, good. Yeah, so it is D. I don't know how true that is, to be honest. In reality. Right, so situation. Researchers have concluded that men who have owned a pet for at least 2 years are prepared for healthy marriages. So the reasoning is, which option most strengthens the conclusion? Researchers base their conclusion on an assumed connection between sustained care for a pet and care for a spouse. Men who care for pets, the argument runs, are also statistically more likely to sustain marriage relationships. So the correct answer will provide additional evidence for the correlation between pets and marriage being sustained. And there you go. Right, so a few key facts. Your knowledge of the topic is not important in answering critical reasoning questions. It's just the logic of the argument. Distinctions between answer choices can be subtle, very small, so eliminate the obviously bad choices. Each piece of info in the text is usually important for answering the question. One more. Okay. So 10 years ago, Brand 1 Cola was the most popular brand among beverage consumers. Today, however, consumers buy twice as much Brand 2 Cola as Brand 1, even though Brand 2 is nearly twice as expensive as Brand 1. Which of the following, if true, would best explain this apparent discrepancy described above? 80% get this correct. So that means it's a fairly easy one, should be. So what's the argument?
The argument is that the discrepancy means like something strange in
like a paradox. Something that...
And the paradox is that, however, some years ago, Brand 1 was more popular. Now, Brand 2 is even more popular, despite of bigger price.
Yeah, despite higher price. That's it, essentially. So how can we explain the fact that this is a lot more popular now, even though it is a lot more expensive than the other brand? Which one of the answer choices would help us explain that best?
Well, it seems that an A option is helpful.
A? Right, okay, but there you would be assuming that there is a difference in taste and that Brand 2 tastes better than Brand 1. But we don't have any information about that in the stem.
Yeah, I think B is the option.
Yeah, but we don't know okay, so we know the relation between the prices.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Brand 2 has decreased in price over the last 2 years. Well, that doesn't really explain the discrepancy because it's still double the price as Brand 1, even if it has reduced in price. The problem is it's still twice as expensive as Brand 1. And why do more people like it, even though it's double the price? You see, so B doesn't really help us there either.
Maybe D?
Okay, D. Brand 2 Cola is more readily available than Brand 1 Cola. So what that means is you can find it everywhere, right? So imagine, every 10 shops, 9 of them you can find Brand 2, and only 1 of them you can find Brand 1. That, I think, helps us, doesn't it? Helps us to explain why people would be choosing Brand 2.
Yeah.
Because you can find it more easily. It's available everywhere. If I have to go into the city just to find Brand 1, it's 10 miles away, I'm not going to do that. I'll stick with brand 2 because it's closer.
And the first thing that came to mind when we read the STEM is that it's something about loyalty of the brand.
Okay, that was your first gut reaction, your instinct. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but that's not that's not contained in the answer choices, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it had been, then yeah, that would have been a good one to go for. But you're doing the right thing in having a hunch, what we say a hunch or an instinct, before you actually read the answer choices. Because actually the theory says that you should first, have a guess at what the answer choice might be, and then go on to the answer choices to see if you find your hunch among the answer choices. So you're doing the right thing by doing that. But unfortunately, it's not there, that brand loyalty. But yeah, okay, so does everybody see why D is the answer then? Okay, right, I think this one might be more tricky. So, company spokesperson charges that our corporation has discriminated against women in its hiring and promotion practices are demonstrably untrue. In fact, statistics show that greater than 60% of our corporation's employees are women. The answer to which of the following questions would be most relevant in evaluating this argument? So it's asking us to evaluate the conclusion, evaluate the argument. And the argument is that because 60% of our company's employees are women, that means that we cannot be discriminating against women. Is that a good argument? What would we need to evaluate that?
Could it be a B option? What percentage of the company's employees in high-level management positions are women?
Yeah, why would that help us to evaluate the conclusion?
So we, as I understood, we're testing the hypothesis about the hiring and promotion practices.
Yeah.
And discrimination in these two practices, but we know that around 60% of employees are women in the corporation.
Yeah.
So in terms of hiring, I think it's okay, but what about the promotion?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so absolutely. So if you had 60% of your employees were women, but they all occupy the lowest levels in the company hierarchy, then that is not going to support your view that you do not discriminate against women, is it? So finding out some information about the positions of the people in the company would help us to evaluate this argument. So you're correct, it is B. Does everybody see that?
And I have a question. I think that the option B, it is said that in higher level management positions. And it is said about the whole employees, not only high level.
Yeah. But what it's asking us to do here is choose an answer option which would best allow us to evaluate the conclusion in the STEM. So the conclusion in the STEM is that we are not biased against women, we are not discriminating against women, and we prove it because 60% of our staff are women. And if I have some information about who in the company is a manager and who is not a manager, that will help me to evaluate their argument that they're not discriminating against women. Because if I find out that all the women, no women are managers, they all occupy low-down positions, and all the men are managers and high-level managers, then that sort of undermines their view that they're not discriminating against women. Do you get me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So this is a slightly different type of question. I think I understand where you're coming from with your question there. Maybe you were trying to say that it's out of scope, or it's not connected to the question. But You know, it depends on the question type. Here it's asking us to evaluate the conclusion, and which of these answer options would best do that.